Hey everyone, and welcome to another awesome edition of Articulate Live webinars. My name is David Anderson, and I'll be your host/presenter today. A couple things real quick before we get started. As always, we are recording today's session, and you'll receive a recording in 2 days after the webinar. That 2 days just gives us a little extra time to make sure everything was recorded correctly and it all set for you. Also, you'll notice that there is a handout in the Handouts pod that'll cover some of the tutorials, resources, downloads, and examples that we're covering today. And you also have access to a questions pod. In there, you can ask questions during the session, and I will take a break toward the end to address any high-level questions. And let's take a look at what we'll cover today. So we're going to look at the top 5, maybe 6, might throw an extra one in there, interactions in Storyline 360. These interactions are really the ones that will help you achieve most of your basic needs in Storyline. Obviously, there's dozens more that we could look at. But if you're looking at some of the most common ways to use the tools, that's what we'll cover. We'll look at examples, both e-learning and non-e-learning related, to show you how other industries are using these interactions. And then, of course, we'll build each interaction out from the ground up so you can see what that workflow looks like in Storyline 360. All right, let's get started and take a look at the most used, most common interactions. Okay, so first up is the tabs interaction, probably the most common, most used, most flexible interaction type out there. That's because they're just a fantastic way to organize and group related content so learners can explore material without having to leave the current slide. So just a really great way to create more pull-based courses without having to send learners off to different slides or loading additional pages each time they want to view some related content. So what do they look like? Well, they can be literal, like this example here. So in this example, these tabs kind of resemble real-world folder tabs. And as we click each one, we see that different content's loaded. The content obviously is related to the label. And you also see we have a selected state here that's different than the other tabs. So this is something that Storyline makes really easy as well. Just helps indicate what the current tab or button selection is. And of course, when we go through each of these, we can see the different content. So that's one example of a tabs interaction. Let's take a look at another. And this one right here. So this one is a little bit more of a minimalist design. So the tabs are really just sort of buttons. And so they act the same, and they have the current, selection state here for each tab. So it shows you which tab you're on, which button tab you're on. And as we click each one, we load additional content. So this is really easy to do in Storyline, and one of the benefits to tabs interactions in Storyline is that they really encompass all of the core building blocks of interactivity, the states, the layers, and the triggers. So when you can build a tabs interaction, you should have a pretty good idea for Storyline's workflow. So let's jump in and take a look at how to build one real quick. So I'll just start here on this basic practice slide. And we'll try to recreate the one we just saw up here, right, with the basic tabs on the bottom, just 4 tabs with some content that's loaded. So the first thing I want to do is just lay down some rectangles. We'll use those as our shapes, as our buttons. So we go up to the Insert tab, Shape, and I'll just grab the regular rectangle, click once on the slide, and I can kind of move this up a little bit. And with that selected, I'm just going to type in button 1. And what I'll do now is just, position it down here on the bottom, Control C, Control V to paste it. And I can change this label to 2. Another way to duplicate would be to hold down the Control key and then click and drag. So that's another way to do it. And then I can do also a Control D, whichever's faster, just knowing that there's a couple ways that you can do that. Now, I don't really have these spread out as wide. They're not really filling up the entire bottom of the slide. So one thing I can do, and this is just more of a alignment tip, production tip, is to select all, Control G to group them, and then with it grouped, I can stretch them out and align it over here on the edge, Control Shift G to ungroup, and they're going to be nicely spaced right there. If I wanted to do something more and tighten them up a little bit, I could also do that. Maybe I'll move it right above that bottom bar right there. So I have 1, 2, 3. I need to rename this one button 3, and then I'll type in here button 4. So if I look down here in the states, in the timeline, you can see that each of the rectangles is named. Probably makes sense to name each of these just to make it easier for us to find each of those. So I'm just going to go through each one, double click in the timeline. I'll just paste the name right there and then change the last digit. So button 3 and then button 4. benefit here of using the common prefix for each of these button names is that it'll make it really easy for me to identify if I'm working with a lot of objects and triggers. So all of my buttons begin with the name button, right? So that makes it kind of easy to find them. Not such a big deal here because we're only working with these 4 objects, but if I had a lot more on the slide, that would be a good case to do it. All right, so if I look in each button, right, I want to add some states here to show the hover state, right, just to give that visual feedback to the learner that, hey, this is an active button. This is something active that you can click. And then also a selected state. Selected state says this is the currently active state, which gives that visual change compared to the other buttons to show that this is the one that we're currently looking at. So come over here to the States tab right here, click inside there, and you can see by default we have a normal state for the button. I'm going to click Edit States, and I want to create a new state. So click the New State icon, and then over here, I'm going to drop down, and you can see that Storyline has some built-in states, right? The hover, down, visited, selected, and then there's some specific drag and drop options right there. But what we want to work with is the built-in hover state and then the built-in selected state. So these have some built-in superpowers right there. When you mouse over them, the hover state's automatically going to know to change the state, so you don't need a trigger for that. And it's also going to change the mouse cursor, the hand cursor, the mouse cursor to the hand cursor so that you can indicate that, hey, this is a clickable object. So Storyline's going to do all that for us. We don't need any special triggers or any other programming to make that happen. These buttons have their own superpowers. So I click hover and I click add, and by default, it's going to look just like the normal state. So we want to change the way that works. And we do that by formatting it. And so maybe I'll go a little bit lighter in the fill color for the hover state. And so that would be okay. And I think this one should be showing us that it's the button state there. Yeah. Make that our default, the lighter state. And then I'll also use a selected state. So I'm also going to select one of the built-ins. This time I'll just choose it right there. Also, another production tip, though, this might make it faster as you start to get more familiar with it. I don't have to select it with the cursor, with the drop-down menu. Selected, I can just start typing SE, and then you see how Storyline automatically fills that in for us. So that's a little bit faster, especially if you are trying to get out of work a little bit faster and you don't want to spend a lot of extra time. Learning those shortcuts like that makes a big difference because you spend less time editing and doing the repetitive work that is so common in e-learning. Click Add. I'm going to make my selected state a darker color, right? So that's going to be the active one, and then we have normal, which is medium, hover will be lighter, and then selected right there. Click Done. Now, rather than going through and manually adding the same states to the other buttons, I can use another production tip, and that's the Format Painter to take all the properties of this button that we just created, and then quickly paint those formats, format paint those options onto the other buttons. So here's what it looks like. I'm going to select the first one that we did that has the states the way we like. Come all the way up here to the Home tab, select the Format Painter. Actually, what I should do is double click it. If I double click it, then it's going to be persistent. And then you see how this cursor has changed now to the paintbrush tool right next to my cursor. I can just click each of these buttons now, and you see how the states got updated for button 2. I click button 3, those got updated. And then finally, button 4 is updated. And I can click Escape to remove that Format Painter. Super fast way to make that work. Now I have 4 buttons, each with the hover and selected state. Now I want to show you something real quick. If I preview this slide, it's going to work. At least the states will work, but there's going to be one thing that doesn't work the way we want. So if I click, right, there's the hovers. If I click one of them, you see how it's dark? That's showing me correctly that that's the selected state. I click the next one, that's also selected. Well, we're not going to show both of these content slides at the same time, right? If I click the other one, they're all showing selected. If I click it again, it's going to deselect it. So that's the normal behavior. You click it once to select it, you click it again to deselect it. What we would like to see, what gives this tabs type functionality, is to have a toggle effect where only one of these buttons is showing a selected state. That's what we want for the tabs, because if we're loading additional content here, then only one of these can be selected at one time. And I also just noticed that these are not horizontally spaced. So format and distribute the widths. So what I want to do is I want to select all 4 of these buttons, just drag a selection around them, right click anywhere on the outside of the button. So you see the cursor here on the edge. Don't click on the inside, but you want to click when you get that 4 arrow cursor. And then from there, I'm just going to choose button set from the drop down menu, and I'll choose button set 1. So button set 1 means just create a new button set. If you had a bunch of these on the slide, you could create more, but honestly, you're just usually working with just one on a slide. So I click button set 1, and nothing visually is going to change here. Just want to make sure I got that selection, button set 1. Now when I preview the slide, check this out. That button 2 is showing selected. If I come over here and select button 4, notice how button 4 shows the selected state, but button 2 now shows back to the normal state. So only one of these buttons is going to act as a currently active or selected button. That's exactly what we want for tabs interaction. So that's a really cool feature in Storyline. We put that in the right-click menu, but you do not need to use a bunch of triggers to go and turn the visibility of all the other objects off when you turn one on. Storyline's going to do that just behind the scenes for you if you assign everything to a button set. Cool. So we've worked with our states, right? Each object has its states. We have our graphics here. Now let's work with the layers. The layers is where we're going to put the content for each of these buttons. And I'm not going to get too fancy with this, but I'm just going to create a new layer. So the new layer icon, and we'll call this one button 1. And the button 1 layer could be anything, or it could be called content 01 if that makes more sense for the button. But the 01 that we're using here is going to tie into the button 1 on the timeline that we're using. So you also notice right here, if I come back in the timeline, we have a full timeline just like we do on the base layer. So this is really cool. It's basically a slide that sits above the default base slide. So we can do timelines and everything else pretty much that we can do on the base layer, but we have a new layer above it. And so this basically acts like a slide that's hidden above the bottom layer. And this is how we can add additional content, but not have to create additional slides each time. So this is another one of those workflow features in Storyline that's just different than other tools. So just to make this easy, I'll put in a text box. Heading goes here. And let's do heading 01, because heading 01 will be for the button 01. And I'm going to change that to a heading. I'm not going to worry about slide layouts or anything like that. And then let's add a content library picture. Office. I'll grab the first one up here and I'll just go through. All right. Nothing super fancy. You design this the same way, any way, custom way that you want. But this is a slide now that resides above the basic base layer slide, and it will never appear until we tell it to appear. So I have content 1 for the button 1, and what I want to do is duplicate it. By duplicating it, I'm going to keep everything pretty much in place, and then I can just make a couple changes. So duplicate it. You can see it takes the same name, and this time I'll just call this one content 02. And I can replace this image from content library. So select the image, choose change picture, content library. The office photos should still stay up. I'll just go through these in order. And that should update. There we go. And I'll change the text right there to heading 2. So the way we talk about this in Storyline is you make something great and then you duplicate. And what we're doing right here, we'll rename this one to content 03. Change this graphic out. Content library. Content library sure does make this easy without having to manage a bunch of local assets. Obviously, if you're doing something more custom, you're going to have your own graphics on your drive, so you'll work with those. But for this quick tutorial demo, workshop, webinar, this is a lot easier. So content 04, change that 3 to 4, and then we'll get crazy and add one more picture. All right, so we are essentially 2/3 done with our button. If I jump back down here to the bottom, to the practice base layer, what we've done is we've added 4 buttons to the base layer. Each one of these buttons has a hover state and a selected state. And then next step, we added the content layers for each button. So this is where we'll link to for each button. And to link to each of those is what we use triggers for. And triggers are essentially the actions that tell Storyline what to do. So pretty much nothing happens in Storyline unless it's got a trigger. So we have our buttons, we have our layers. All that's left is to select each button and then tell Storyline what to do when that button is clicked. So if I come over here to the triggers panel, I want to create a new trigger, right? And the trigger always begins with the action. So the action being, what is it I want to do and when do I want to do it? So what do I want to do? I want to show a layer. And because we've already created all 4 layers, I now have access to those here in this drop-down layer menu. Select content 1 when user clicks button 1. And if I'd accidentally didn't have anything selected or I didn't have the right button, you can see as I move over these in the triggers wizard, I can highlight and find other objects quickly, but see how the buttons are nicely organized by the prefix button. This is what I mean by it really is a lot easier to keep the common prefix for each object. But button 1 is what I want. Select it. No conditions necessary. Click OK. And now in the triggers panel, we have our first option. Here's a pro tip. I've already created 1 trigger. I've got 3 more to create. I can just copy this. So if I right-click the trigger and choose copy, I can then drag a selection around the remaining 3 buttons. With that selected, I can click the paste icon right here. So I'm going to paste the copy trigger to the selected objects. And look at that. Everything gets a new trigger. Now, it did copy the same trigger, right? So the show layer 1, show content 1 is the same for all of these. But check this out. Button 2, I just have to click this little hyperlink option right here and then change that to content 2. So now that's the new layer it's going to show. Button 3 will show it to content 3, and then layer 4, content button 4 is going to show content layer 4. Big production workflow tip when you want to work as efficiently as possible. Let's take a look and preview our slide. All right, so here we go. 4 buttons, click the first one. There's my heading 1. The button selected state is showing. Doesn't matter which order I go into. Now I'm showing heading 3, 4, button 3, and then of course content 3, button 2, and so on. So that's really huge. Even though this is a very simple example, this workflow using the states, the triggers, and the layers is what you're going to do for the simplest projects in Storyline as well as the most complex. The complexity happens when you start to add additional triggers and conditions and additional combinations of the triggers with the content objects and the state changes. So tabs interaction, probably one of the most common used interactions because they're super flexible. They don't have to always look like tabs. They could look like note cards. So in this case, this example right here, I'll preview it, is exactly the same thing. Right? We click each one of these. There's our character and so on, right? So essentially that's a tab interaction. You could call it a note card interaction, but the note cards are really acting like tabs. We still have a selected state for each one, and we only show one piece of related content at a time. And then again, things like checklist interactions, similar, right? You could call it a checklist, but it's really just another subcategory of a tabs because we're showing these one by one. And of course, the difference being is that we're actually using a different type of state in this one, which is called a visited state. So I'll take a look at that real quick just to show you what the difference is. So if I open up one of these, click states, we have a normal and a hover. And instead of a selected state, we're using visited. So once you click anything, that is going to be visited. So you can't unvisit it on the slide. So the difference between this is we're not really toggling through objects like we did before. We're completing a series of tabs, and we want to show those completed tabs with that visited state. So it's all built into Storyline. So the properties, those little superpowers I talked about earlier, they're all part of that, but that's already built in. But everything else is the same. We're using over here, right, triggers to show a new layer, and each layer is going to have its own content, right? So that's another example of the workflow. Tabs interactions, very useful, very practical. They do not have to look like tabs. It can pretty much look like anything, but what they do is they make it really easy to group and chunk related content on the slide without having to jump out or lose the moment or send learners off somewhere else. You can always view the navigation elements, and then the content is loaded usually off to the side or above the tabs or some other place where the available screen space is. All right, let's move on to the next example. All right, so next up is the label graphics interaction. So similar to tabs, label graphics are still click and reveal interactions that also let learners pull information when they need it. However, unlike tabs interactions, label graphics don't require any kind of structured layout. And in fact, really, it could be any kind of layout. The background graphic is really what's going to drive the interaction. So label graphics are going to use these small buttons, which we call markers, and they can be placed anywhere over existing static slides to pretty much transform it into anything or something more explorable. So here's an example of that. Pull this one up. Yeah, so here's an example. These are using Storyline's built-in markers. So these make it really fast. You can see that the marker here, when clicked, has a little label call out, and then this one has a video embedded in it. If I click away from it, the marker disappears. These have the hover state that it's showing the title. This one right here, it's going to show some text. I think this is a graphic. Yep, so we have an image in there. So you can embed media, you can embed audio clips, video clips, or just go with text, like this one here, just some simple text here, or the text using the store hours right here, a little bit more formatting options, but a super quick way to call out information on more complex or detailed graphics. Let's take a look at a couple more examples right here. So in this case right here, I'll copy this link, select all. Not an e-learning example right here, but still they are used in product training, product marketing. All right, so here we go. We have the little labels over here. You see a little hover state as we mouse over each one, click one. Little animation effect goes right there, but essentially the same concept, right? The background graphic is static, and we can just click these markers to explore, learn more about the certain products or features of this graphic. Okay. And here's one more for turkey and different types of holiday meals. This time it's a little different though. The label is not just displaying right above the marker. When we click each marker, it's loading well, this is not Storyline, but if it were, then it would be probably comparable to a slide layer, right? So we get a little bit more information. We have a scroll bar, but essentially the markers are helping us identify certain elements here on this background graphic, right? So the background graphic doesn't change. That's the neat thing about these. So the idea is you could really just swap out the background with something else, change the labels, right? So a different text, a different label here for each heading, and you have still another reusable template. So let's take a look at how this works in Storyline. All right, so we'll jump down here. Basically, when you're building these, whether you're using Storyline's built-in markers, which we'll take a look at, which kind of includes everything for you, or a more custom example where you're going to build everything from the shape to the icon to the label, which I kind of like doing that because the defaults certainly work and help you get through things quickly, but there's something about doing your own that just look different and a little less familiar to different audiences because they haven't seen the exact style, right? But the shape could be anything, could be a square, could be a triangle. In this case, it's just a circle. Whatever icon you want to use, right? So we have free icons with Content Library, or you have your own. Label is just the call out box, whether you use like a chat cloud style with a little tail, or it's just a rectangle that sits behind the graphic. And then, of course, the marker is going to be what has the trigger. So a couple different ways that we can approach this in Storyline. This is the built-in markers. And so what these do is they kind of do it all for you. They're super fast. They have the icons. They have the animations. You put different types of media in there. And they are really just a production workhorse type feature that lets you get through things quickly. If I preview the example here, you'll see that it looks just pretty much like everything we saw before. In this case, the heading, you click each one. We've got an image and some text. I don't think I have any videos in any of these, but it's the same process for adding a video in as, okay, that's a custom one. I shouldn't have showed that one. That one shouldn't be there. That was a custom one, which we'll look at in just a moment. And then this one right here is the built-in markers. So the way this works is we insert them from the Insert tab, and you come on over here to the marker, and you basically choose the icon up front that you want. Now you can always choose this later, so it's not like you're locked into it, but we maybe just grab the question mark. I'm going to click anywhere on the slide, so maybe next to one of these little meters, and what you get is you're prompted to add a title, right? And then you can describe whatever it is you want. And what you also can do is resize this label. So depending on where you place it, you may need to resize it, reposition it, right? I can scale this up a little bit. But Storyline's doing this all for you. And of course, you have full control over the marker and the icon style, right? So if I want to choose one of these pre-built icon styles, I can do that as well. Maybe a bigger border, right? Just to emphasize a little bit, add some contrast on the slide. If I want to add any media, you can see where we have audio options here to record some audio or import it. You can add a video file, I can record a webcam even in here. Then of course, if I don't need to change the icon for anything, I can do that. Now they're not showing up in there because there's the conflict with the color, but now you see that the icon is in there. And of course, the benefit here is I can move this around at any point. And if I don't like, the position's not working, yeah, you just have to change the label position. These are super fast. They're very quick to create, and you can duplicate them and add as many or a few as you like. If you're looking for something more, then you can just make these all yourself. And so that's what a custom state would look like. So in this example, really the same example. I'll go ahead and preview this. But the difference being is that we can control and customize the way the label looks. So the downside is we have to do a little bit more work because we have to move these around, and we don't have that really nice snap to feature like the built-in markers has. However, we can make these look and pretty much do whatever we want them to do because we're building these all ourselves. Notice how only one of these icons has the selected state at one point, right? So when I click the magnifying glass, this one's going to be the dark blue, and then all of these are white. So the way we do this, and if you're just, you're kind of familiar with Storyline, you can kind of look at the slide and say, wait a minute, how did you do it? Or I think I know how you did it, because where is the content for each of these objects? Because you know that the core functionality in Storyline is the states, the layers, and the triggers. So you're looking at this slide and you see, well, I have triggers, and I don't see any triggers, right? I mean, there's this, the jump to next slide. You look down here at the slide layers and say, where's all the layers? Where are you putting it? There's only one other place we can put it, and that would be, in this example, inside of the state. So if I click the States tab, check this out. We have our normal state, and then we have the hover state. So there's our little visual change in the graphics. And then we have the selected state for showing the specific object right there. So that's how we can manage how each of those looks. Right? And of course, if I needed to make any changes, I can click Edit. I can select one of these, and then I've got access to my text. I've got access to all the different graphics or whatever I put in here in the background shapes. And if I wanted to move this over just a little bit, right, I can do that just to help position it. But the downside is that I have to specifically position each of these elements. I mean, of course, I can duplicate each of these and then change the icon, which obviously this is how I worked when I put this together. But if you want to make a global change to all of them, you're going to have to go inside of each one of these and make that change. Now, the benefit is, again, just like the regular markers, is that I can take this marker and paste it on any other slide. If I copy this, let's say I jump back up here and I paste it, that marker and its content travel with me. So I don't have to copy the layer and move that over. Sure, I might have to reposition everything based on where I put it, but this marker sort of is self-contained now. I can reuse these for future projects. So that's one of the benefits for working with the built-in states when you're working with the custom markers. So the other option here would then be to work with layers, and everything here looks pretty much the same. Don't need to go through and click everything. Well, actually I will, because we changed the layout, only because we just wanted to change the layout here to show you a different option. So if I click each one of these, now we're using that light box effect for the layers. I think we saw that one in the that turkey, that holiday example, right? So each one of these is going to show the layer, and it just kind of covers up everything on the background. So the difference being here is if I select each of these, all these markers have here is just a normal and hover state, and the content now is all over here for each slide layer. So just a different approach to it. Storyline does let you copy one or more layers now. So if I wanted to place this graphic, right, I could copy all of those. And let's say I was making something else, with a different project, I could paste those layers here so I don't lose all of my content. So there's a fantastic way to reuse all those content layers, but I have to manage the content in two different places. So depending on the complexity of the graphics and the labels that you're using, maybe it just makes sense to bake everything into a single marker that you can move around. Or if you're doing more, especially with the timeline, where you want to control how these objects come in and what they do, then the slide layers may make a little bit more sense. All right, so whether you're using the layers or states to manage your interactive markers, the thing that makes these interactions so popular and flexible is the fact that it's a single background image here that drives the entire interaction. So if I didn't mean to do that. I wanted to change this, deselect my background graphic, right? So if I turn off this, it's really just the markers that are moved appropriately over a single image. So let's just say we want to swap this background of photography equipment out for, let's grab something from content library photos. And we'll type in, let's see if we have some veggies here. Yeah, so something like this, right? So we have this image of veggies. We'll click insert. If it's the same aspect ratio, no, it's not. So I'll just bring it up a little bit and then format crop just to remove this extra part of the image from the bottom. But essentially we have a new image. Our markers are still wired up, right? We still have all of the triggers over here for these, and we have our content layers. So obviously we just really need to update the content layers, right? Swap out the graphics, change the text for each object, each marker. But essentially we can then reposition the markers wherever we need them. If you're using, say, custom icons like this one, right, we might want to change the camera icon for something else, but essentially you have all you need set up. It's just about swapping the background graphic and then updating your either states or content layers for that graphic. So super powerful, super flexible interaction, one of the quickest ways to create some interactivity. Here's another example real quick. A little bit more often seen for product or UI application tours. So the idea here is that you present the user with a interface and then they can drill down. So let's take a look at this one as a real example. Now the neat thing here is that this is a little bit more custom. So all these graphics here were created in a graphics program, and then you see each one of these has sort of kind of blows up the part of the interface. Another example here, right, just for using for application or interface training, and it kind of assumes that the learner has some familiarity with the application, and you're just letting them drill down into specific areas of it. So another approach of it, but these markers are really what drive the entire interaction. I could easily replace the background graphic and then change the content for each of these markers, and I would have, everything I need for them. All right, so quick look at the markers. Drag and drop sorting activities are a great way to evaluate your learner's ability to identify items by dragging them to different drop targets. And one of the most common versions of this activity is designed around whether items should be, say, kept or discarded. So let's look at a couple examples before we build a simple one here. So let's jump into here. Right, so in this example, we're asking the learner to identify permissible objects, which objects are permissible in the workplace and which ones aren't. Tea, coffee or tea is probably permissible. Knives and things like that probably are not. Plants, sure, we want to see plants. Your family, great, show us your family. Family, right? A radio, this is a good one, not really sure, depends on your workplace. Let's say it is not permissible because it doesn't seem like it has a headphone, but just a guess, candles are probably not permissible. Let's try it, see what we did it right. A knife and the candle, but everything else. So in this case, it's telling me that I could have put the radio on the desk. So I guess I was a little bit too strict there. All right, so meeting items in this example, right? Optional versus required items. So you can just drag each one in and place them here on the drop targets. And then, of course, whatever they are, you can check your answer. And then finally, you don't have to have two targets, right? In this case, you just have necessary items and you have a single item, right? So what are you going to put in here prior to your review with a meeting with an employee, any rewards, feedback from others, job description. Not sure you need insurance information. And there we go. So a couple different examples and ways that we can look at sorting activities with drag and drop. All right, and so we just looked at those examples, and let's build this example real quick and take a look at some of the options we have in Storyline for building drag and drop interactions. So let's go ahead and start here. In this example, I have just my two graphics here for a drop target, two drop targets, one that we want to trash and then one that we want to keep. And they're just PNG images down here, you can see in the timeline. And then I do have this single graphic right here, just a rectangle with some text. So a couple things here. I'll just make a couple of these. We don't have to build the full thing out. We want to identify some notes to trash and then some notes to file. So I'm going to duplicate this one. You can see it's called, down here in the timeline, drag 01. Well, let's just hold the control key down, click and drag, and we'll call this one note 2. And I will update it here as drag 02. Again, keeping these common prefixes makes it really easy to identify from the trigger panel or from the form view panel, which we'll see when we convert this to an interaction. But really like to keep these set up in that way. And drag 1, I'll make 2 more of these. So note 3, and then, didn't get it. There we go, got it, 4. So we'll call this one drag 4, and then the other one will be drag 03. Okay, so I've got 2 of them. Let's say we'll make the odd number ones go into the trash can, and then we'll make the even ones, we'll say, go into the keep it. So it doesn't really matter. At this point, I've got my interaction here. It's a fully custom interaction in that I've designed everything with a slide. I haven't had any constraints of a form or any other type of template, right? I can move these around. I can do a lot of different things with them. What I want to do now is convert it to a freeform interaction, and I'll choose the drag and drop. So I come up here to insert, and the second option right here, convert to freeform. And then you can see that we have 6 different types of freeform questions. The one I'm interested in here is the drag and drop. So I'll leave that selected and then just click OK. So it's not going to change anything on my slide, but it is going to automatically, Storyline is going to automatically take me to form view. And I mean by form view, over here on the right side, you can see we have this form view tab. By default, we're always working in slide view, which is just that blank slide approach where you customize and move and arrange and design everything the way you want. Form view is where we're going to wire up the choices. So we're not going to interfere or affect our design layout, but it's here that we can choose which items are draggable and which items are the drop targets. And we do that over here in the form. So here's where I want to select my first item, my drag item. So let's say drag 01, which is the note. And we said what? The odd numbers will go into the trash. So my drop target will be drop 01 trash. And then I'm looking for drag 02, which will go into drop 02. And then drag 03 into drop 01. And of course, you know, if I had something else, different way I want to manage this, that's fine. But I thought even and odd, that kind of makes it easy to work with here. So number 4 is an even file cabinet. So this is the correct choices. If I pop back over here to slide view, you'll see that everything still looks the same. I can swap these graphics out with different icons. Everything can still be modified, but I essentially have my interaction. And also check this out, right? So down here in the bottom in the slide layers, I've automatically got 2 layers that were created for correct and incorrect. And that happened because when we converted it to the freeform, by default, Storyline thinks that you want to treat it like a quiz. If I didn't, I could totally change that as well in my options, but let's just preview the file real quick and see how this works. All right, so everything is where it is, and automatically these are draggable objects now. I can put them anywhere I want, right? And just, I don't think I got this correct. I'll click submit, and there's my feedback. So here's some options that we have that are really cool in Storyline, and I think sometimes they're missed by users because the drag and drop functionality by itself is already so cool. One of the things we can do is we can actually give some visual feedback to the learners to indicate that they drop the item in a correct or incorrect target before they click submit. So let me show you in this final example what I'm talking about. So really the same interaction, but this one's just been fleshed out. If I drop it on here, notice how immediately I get the change of color here to indicate that either I dropped this on a correct or incorrect. So right now it's telling me, I haven't even clicked submit yet, but it is telling me that this note right here does not belong in the file cabinet. It belongs here in the trash. So if I go through each one, I'm getting that feedback right immediately without having to wait to submit it, right? So if that one's green, it belongs there. That one's green, green, and that's probably red. So just a way to kind of lead the learner to a better choice, right? I'm still not scoring it. I haven't submitted the interaction yet, but I am providing them some visual feedback indicating that, hey, what you're doing, you're on the right track, or you're not on the right track, and you may want to think about that again. So if we come back down here to our example, here's what this looks like. So note 1, I want to select it. Then I want to come down here in the states tab, which is in the timeline, next to the timeline, and I want to add 2 new states to this. So we do that by clicking first the Edit States button, and we'll create a new state. And here in the drop-down, you'll see that at the very bottom, we have some built-in states here. So we have the drag over, which we're not using here. In this case, we want to show a drop correct state. And right now it duplicates the first one, right? But if I come up here to Format tab, and let's fill it with the green, that's good for drop correct. And then we'll add one more for the drop incorrect, right? So, okay. And it should duplicate the normal state by default, and we'll change that to red, just to indicate that, nope, not a good choice. Colors look like they're fine. Obviously, I could put some icons in here and further design these, but the colors is going to be enough just for us what we're doing now. Click Done Editing. All right, cool. But I still need to add the states for the other 3 notes, and I don't really want to lose a lot of time manually doing it, so I can select the one that I just worked on. Come up here to the Home tab, double-click Format Painter. We're going to double-click it because we want to keep this tool persistent, and now I can just paint those states to these other objects. Super cool, super fast, really efficient. Now I've got this, I can just press Escape to get rid of that tool. Now I have to do one other thing here before this is going to work correctly, and I need to go back into Form View. So come over here, over above the Triggers panel, Form View, and I need to change the options. So drag and drop options, and this is really worth familiarizing yourselves with because there's a lot of cool things we can do in here, and you a lot of times may not even open this up, and you still have a pretty cool drag and drop interaction, but there's even more we can do with it. So take a look at this. By default, down here in the bottom, this option is selected, and it's telling Storyline to delay the item drop states until we've clicked the Submit button. But what we want to have happen here is we want to actually not delay those. We want that immediate visual feedback. So as soon as we drop one of those items on a drop target, we want to see those states change. Click OK, preview the file. So everything should look the same. Let's say if I take note 1 and put this on an even, there's that visual feedback, and I could move it over here to the other one. And then, of course, you see how these snap into place, right? Maybe you don't want that. We can come in here and, again, open up our drag and drop options, and we can choose to stack random. We can have them free, which means they just have to touch any part of the target, stack to center, tile, and so on. So there's some options here for how these would work. I think what we have for stacking random is fine, but free is just going to make it look a little bit more like a free form interaction. Just have to make sure that part of that drag item is touching, right, just a piece of it. So as long as it's touching part of that target, you should see it's working just fine. So a couple easy ways in Storyline to create sorting activities as well as customize those sorting activities using Storyline's built-in drag and drop options for giving that visual feedback. And so the 4th most common interaction would be a pick one type interaction. And the Storyline's pick one really is just a multiple choice question, but instead of having to use only text as your answer choices, you can use objects, pictures, characters, shapes, buttons, pretty much anything. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. So in this one, we're looking at some custom buttons that we created, right? And so notice how only one of these options can be selected. And we click Submit, and then we get our feedback. Cool. And in this example, it's more of a scenario where each of these buttons has been created from scratch. These are not your traditional radio buttons or checkboxes. Click one of these, and then we click submit, and then we also get our feedback here for this one. And then finally, here's another example. This one is just a couple images that are being used in the pick one, or in this case, it's a this or that. You make your selection, and obviously it's only one or two choices can be correct. But again, we don't have to use the built-in scoring or grading. We can just have these be single slide practice activities where we just continue to the next slide, or we can use the feedback and scoring that's part of the pick one convert to freeform. So let's take a look at how to put these together in Storyline 360. All right, so let's start off with just a simple graphic right here. It's a circle with it's a white fill, and then it has this light blue on the outline. And if I drill into the states right here, you can see that I have a custom selected state for it. If I double click to drill down, got just a check mark here, and then the slightly different darker outline color. So that's what we'll start with for each of these. So I'm just going to see it's called button 1 right here. So I'm just going to hold down the control key, come down here, make a copy of it, and we'll call this one button 2. Whoops, not that, button 2, button 02. And select both of those, and then we'll do a control click drag to make 2 more. And let's see, this one will be button 4. And then that'll be button 3. All right. So the idea is that each of these is going to be a choice, and I have some text boxes off to the side so we can just kind of line these up for each of them. It's not totally perfect, not totally aligned, but that's going to be enough. All right. And so at this point, it's just we're just designing this on the slide here. Nothing fancy. It's still our own design. We're not being limited or driven here by a specific form or template. And then what I want to do now is just convert this to a free form, and we'll use the pick one. So again, design it any way you want. I have custom graphics if I wanted. Once you have it sort of aligned and set up the way you like, go up to the Insert tab, convert to freeform, and this time we'll choose pick one, and just click OK. And so just like with other convert to freeforms, you're immediately taken here into form view. You'll see that over here, right? It's switched to form view. By default, we're usually working over in slide view, where you have the open slide, the blank slide, where you can pretty much do whatever you want on that slide. Once we convert it, then we're taken to form view, where we can wire up the correct and incorrect choices, and then we'll still be able to return and have a free form view approach for designing our slide. All right, so over here in form view, I want to come up and then just choose my choices. So my choices would be button 1. And notice as I highlight, as I hover over each of these, you notice over here on the right side, right, each of these is highlighted to indicate, hey, that's the one you're currently looking to select. So even if you don't name your files correctly or your objects, at least you have a little bit of an aid over here to help identify what you're working with. But still, I'd always prefer to name these correctly just because it makes it easier to find them here from the drop-down. And we'll just make button 1 correct right here. So button 1 oval, and I'll jump over here to slide view. All right, so I'm going to show you one thing that happened here. We'll fix this, but right now I'm going to show you how this works and how you can kind of clean this up real quick. So I'm going to select the first graphic right here, and then notice down in the selected state, our selected state is there, but there's actually this glow. Don't worry about the way this is rendering, but there's a yellow glow on the outside of my shape. And so whenever you convert to freeform, Storyline's going to automatically add that. If I just change it real quick to selected, there's that glow right there, right? So it adds a glow, and the idea is to redoing that, because if you didn't have a selected state, then you need to kind of have something that says or identifies how that's going to be visually different than the normal state. Okay, but we already created our selected state, but we still add that anyway. And you'll also notice on the other ones that since we only chose this first one as correct, they just have the glow and not the checkbox. So it doesn't really matter what your workflow is. If you've already added a custom state, go to the item that you added as the correct choice. I'm going to double click this, and I'm just going to remove the glow from that selection. So go to Format, Shape Effect, Glow, and I'm going to choose No Glow, and that's removed. And click Done. And then to fix the rest of these real quick, I'm going to use the Format Painter. So up to the Home tab, double click Format. Whoops, I don't want that one. I want this one. So select this one, Home tab, Format Painter, and now I can quickly paint these the way I like. So it's just something you have to do as a workaround. We'll get that resolved, but That's kind of the workflow for working with custom objects in the states. At this point, you'll also notice down here in the slide layers, we've added 2 new layers for us, indicating the correct and incorrect layers. So we have a quiz, we have a pick one. Doesn't matter what we do with this, but this is now going to work. So we'll preview. Oh, I have this one selected as default selected. Turn that off. Now let's preview one more time. Make our choice. And you see how it has that toggle effect, right? So that's the benefit of that's how the pick one works. Where only one choice, just like a multiple choice, can be selected, click submit, and there's my correct feedback. Now, if we have these buttons detached from the actual text, then we definitely don't want to use any sort of sorting. And if I go to form view and I come over here to shuffle, there's no shuffling. So if you want to shuffle them, then you're going to want to connect each choice with the object. And so the way I would do this then is to group each of these, right? So if I select the 2, let's go into the timeline, move that out a little bit. So I'm going to select both of those, Control G, and that's called group 2. So let's say at choice 1, and the same thing, right? Now I haven't aligned these, so I know this doesn't look right. Choice 2, Control G to group, and then choice 3, and then finally choice 4. So I know my alignment's off. I know that. Choice 4. Now I need to come back in here to form view, and you see how it did automatically select each of those groups for me, kind of rolled everything up in there. And now the benefit is that these will travel together. And if I wanted to, move these in, I could reposition. But the objects are together. I can still change my text, and now I have at least the objects connected. And if I wanted to shuffle them, shuffle answers, and preview the file, now that they can all move around, and I'll still be able to work like that. Right, there's my choice 1, my choice 4, and so on. So a couple options there for working with the pick one. I like keeping these grouped, right, rather than putting the text inside of the shape, which is certainly a valid way to do it. Right, I could have taken this text box and then added it inside of one of these states. The downside is that it's a little tougher to edit because I'd have to drill down into the object states each time I want to make the change, versus right here I've got the live text on the slide. Downside is that if I ungroup it, then I've got to re-add this as a choice, but that's really not such a big deal. So the pick one of the most flexible interactions you have for creating creative multiple choice questions where you want to use something beyond the typical text choice answer, whether that's a pictures, a characters, shapes, buttons, or anything. Step graphics are interactive explanations that make it really easy for learners to sequentially walk through a process or a workflow, procedure, any kind of related items. They can be used pretty much for all types of learning interactions, from procedural training to interactive storytelling. They're similar to tabs interactions, except they use numeric pagination. So they're great for chunking complex information similar to tabs, but they're more focused around step-by-step explanations that visually organize each step of a process. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. So you'll see these types of interactions used a lot in multimedia journalism because they're using multimedia to walk you through or tell a story. So in this example, you're seeing each step of a dunk in terms of the physics and how the basketball players are able to, get up off the ground, especially the short guys too, and get that ball up in there. A lot of times they're used for explaining a tragedy, right? So what happened? What were the steps? How did it play out? Rather than just using words, they can use a step graphic interaction, or stepper, so as they're sometimes called, to walk you through and tell the story visually with less text, but simple animations and graphics. So you see little call outs here, kind of walking you through what each of these is really the steps and what happened, how it played out. And then sometimes they can be combined with more animation, right, for zooming in or emphasizing parts of interaction. So you'll see the step graphics with images, and then maybe there's a 3D or animated video that transitions between the two slides or the two steps and walks you through to show you exactly what happened. All right, so let's take a look at how to put that together in Storyline. All right, so in this example, again, they're going to work a lot like tabs interactions, but we have a series of steps right here. So just really the numeric pagination. The navigation isn't really filling up the slide. If I had fewer steps, whoopsie, we could certainly delete some of those graphics and only use the pieces that we need. So in this example, we'll just preview it. And what it's walking you through is how to build a paper airplane. And so each step represents a different step in the process. So we're loading slide layers here for the instructions, and then you have the visuals to explain it. What's nice about these, similar to label graphics, is that once you have your pagination set up, right, you can just change the contents on the slide layers. So we have each of these graphics right here. It has a trigger, right? We're going to show a layer, and then each layer in this case is sequential, is added sequentially based on the steps that you go through. And so we go through each of these steps, and you can see the parts of the graphic. All right, so that's all there is to it right there. What's nice about it then again is this is the graphic here for the bottom. If you need to swap this out for something else, you could certainly do that, and then just really replace your content down here, or grab your step buttons and then drop those into an entirely new project. And of course, if you didn't need them all, just come in and take out a few of these that you don't use, and you can have them. But maybe make a bunch of them up to 10 or 20 steps, so you have them once, and then just remove the steps that you don't need. And of course, you could even leave the layers up there because they're never going to be shown if you don't actually have buttons to show those layers. Flashcard interactions are a simple click and reveal activity that really lets learners explore virtually any type of content, such as words, numbers. You can use them on both sides, or show a visual on one side that flips over and gives a definition. We'll look at a couple examples here. They're really easy to make in Storyline, and you have a couple options for really how you build them out. So in this example, I don't have any content on these, but the idea is that as you click each card, you're seeing the other side of it. So we don't really have the flip animation. That could be done with a little bit of extra work, but essentially we're just toggling between two states here in a graphic. And of course, if you wanted to add visuals and then have some content on the back of them, you can do that, which is obviously kind of how these are used. Now you also have some options for whether only one card is showing at a time. You could shuffle these, or you could have them all flip over together, and I'll show you how each of those would work in Storyline. So we'll jump down here to a new slide, and we'll just keep it fairly simple here for our example. And I'll draw out a card, and we'll make this just a little bit lighter. And we'll add some text here. So flash card 1. And now since I can't really see that text, we'll make it a little bit darker. So we'll go into the Home tab and then change that to white. And what I want to do is then just add a new state. In this case, a selected state at the minimum. You could do hover and visit it as well. But the essence of these is that you have a slide with two different parts of content, two different states. So we'll create a new state, and we'll call this selected. I can type this in actually, SEL, and of course if I wanted to use the menu, I can select that from right here in the drop down. Click add, and let's just change the color here. So I'll make this dark, and now we have to make the text light. So flashcard 1, and we'll copy this a couple times. Whoops, copy the card, not the text, and I'll drag that over. And Control-C, Control-V. All right, so you have 6 cards. So one way to do them is not to have these all toggle, right, but just to have them all reveal as you go through them. So if I preview the slide, what will happen is we click each one, it's going to remain persistently in that selected state. That's cool. That might be how you want it. You could even do or include a next button on the slide or on the player that's enabled that displays once all 6 or however many cards you have been selected. The other option would be to make these into a button set. So I just select all of the cards on the slide, right click, and then choose button set 1. And now when we preview, only one card will be able to display the content. So it's kind of up to you in that sense. You could also do it as a convert to freeform where it shuffles all of the cards, and then you've got to view them and then maybe answer a question or something like that. But in in a really simple way, just using the cards with the selected state is all you need to do to build flashcards. And of course, you can have multiple slides that display these. You could put them in different ways, like in a question bank. A lot of options for working with flashcards Super simple interaction with a lot of possibilities for skill and drill practice. Well, there you have it. The top 5, no, actually 6 most common interactions in Storyline 360. Hope you enjoyed today's webinar. And as always, if you have any questions or need some help or get stuck, please post in eLearning Heroes, and we'll be more than happy to pop in there and give you a hand and help you sort it out. Thanks again for attending, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Thanks.